So we're talking about reading rate and graded readers versus a reading rate test. In here, my name is Mike Misner, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Hawaii, and I'm ABD, so I'm writing up my dissertation now. This isn't part of my dissertation research, but it's something that I'd like to work on and get published after working on my dissertation. So kind of a branch of the research that I like to do. So what I'm going to talk about is what is a good reading rate for language learners? Okay? How can we test students' reading rates? Because different types of tests produce different types of results. Yeah? And how do different types of tests give different answers? Depending on the test, you might get a different speed or a different rate. And so what should we use as our standard in the field? And I think these are questions that people aren't asking. There's just one or two ways that we do reading rate tests, and everybody says in the research, okay, I did a reading rate test, this is their actual reading rate. And I think that that's not exactly true. I think that their reading rate is much more complicated than that. In order to determine what is a good reading rate, we take a look at Carver's 5 years of reading. And over here you can see that this one right here is 300 words per minute. Right? And 300 words per minute is the normal reading rate for students who are native speakers of English and who are academic type people. So it turns out that if you check the number of eye movements that a person makes, they can read at 300 words per minute. That's like the physical maximum that you can read at. You can actually read at 330 words a minute, but we kind of backtrack over some words that we didn't understand and reread them. So anyway, it turns out that the physical maximum you can read at is about 300 words a minute. So if students are reading at 400 or 500 words a minute, they're skimming or they're scanning, but they're not reading. And that's a different type of process, which, as you can see, there are different mental processes which are involved in reading versus skimming. All right, so that's for native speakers, but we want to know what is a good reading rate for language learners. So according to Higgins and Wallace, 180 words a minute is what is considered kind of the area between mature and immature reading. Now, some other people have suggested 200 words a minute. Dubin and Bicina said 200 words a minute would be kind of an appropriate level to consider reading for comprehension. Because below 200 you're reading and then stop, because you get hit by an unusual word. And then read and stop, read and stop, read and stop. And so this stop-go kind of reading affects comprehension. Whereas if you're reading above 200 words a minute, you seem to be reading quite fluently, and you're not having these bumpy bits that mess with your comprehension. Above 200 words a minute, students seem to be enjoying their reading, as opposed to struggling with their reading. Right? So we're taking 200 as a threshold in this study as being an important thing that we need to find out. Right? Anderson, who has, in every single one of his books, he has the threshold. In every book he writes, he has the threshold. And he has added in an extra little bit that I thought was really useful. So he says 200 words per minute, but he also says with at least 70% comprehension. And we know from the study by Hu and Nation that if you read at 98% comprehension of the vocabulary, you have 70% comprehension of the content. Whereas if you're reading at 95% of the vocabulary, you have 50% comprehension of the content. So just a 2-3% increase in the vocabulary results in a major jump in the actual comprehension of the content. So when he says 70% comprehension of the content, what he's talking about is 98% comprehension of the vocabulary, the standard for calling it extensive reading. So if we talk about reading rate tests, there are a few different types of reading rate tests, ways that we can go about finding out how fast our students read. So one is to read the whole text and just determine how much time it took to read the whole text. One is a surprise test. I'm going to give you a surprise reading rate test right now in class. I'd like you to read, and then I'm going to time it. And then the other one is an intensive reading passage. Here's a passage with 400 words in it. You're going to read and answer comprehension questions. What does that look like? Well, the whole reading rate test, students read, they write down in a journal, I read for 1 hour, but did they really exactly read for 1 hour? It's not so sure, right? So then there's the surprise reading rate test. And so you say to the students, you're going to read for 1 minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes, maybe up to 5 minutes. I'm going to time you. After, you're going to mark in the book where you start, and you're going to mark in the book where you finish, and then you're going to count up all the words and divide by 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, right? And then we'll come up with your words per minute. Are you ready? Go! But this seems like a test to the students. They want to perform well on this, so they will hit the gas and read as fast as they possibly can. In fact, they might even skim. So then we don't actually come up with their reading rate. Then there is the intensive reading passage, 400 words, and then after you read this, you have to mark your time, turn it over, answer some comprehension questions to see that you actually did read it and understand it, not just read it and not understand it. And then we call this, in many studies, their reading rate. But in my experience with my students from Korea, they will take this as a test and they will read as fast as they possibly can, at their maximum reading rate. Even if you tell them, I don't want to know your maximum reading rate. I don't want to know your translation reading rate. I don't want you to translate the words or circle or underline. I don't want you to read super fast. I want you to read the same speed you read your regular books. Say that, they'll still read as fast as they can. They read as fast as they can. So, here, so there are a few problems with those things, and I'm going to suggest a way of figuring out a few different solutions to those problems. But one thing that I wanted to take a look at really quickly, and I know there's a lot of data on this page, so I'm just going to point you to something simple. A variety of studies have been done, and they've shown that students have read quite a few words, and that they've made reading rate gains. In reading rate gains. And so in some studies they made 92 words per minute gain, but this was unusual, this one, the long crashing study. That was unusual. They really made a lot of gains in a short period of time. And in some of these things, there were methodological problems, such as the reading rate tests for the beginning and the end of the study were different levels, like level 1, level 4. And so it messes up the reading rate. Beglar, Kite and Beglar and Hunt, they do amazing research. They do very rigorous, detailed research. And their methodology is fantastic. So I really learn a lot from whenever I read any article written by this group of people. And I really respect their research. They come up with very solid results. Okay? This happens to be my study down here. This is what I did with my students. So my students increased by about 40 words per minute, depending on what kind of test you give them. But the point that I wanted to show you in this particular thing is that if you read 4,000 words, or 6,000 words, or 17,000 words, or 3,000 words, or 2,000 words, or 3,000 words, you're going to increase by 1 word per minute. So the number of words it takes to increase by 1 word per minute. If you wanted your students to increase by 40 words a minute, you might take 3,000 words and multiply that by 40 and say that's how many words you have to read this semester. It's a guideline for teachers to determine how much the student should be reading. It's also quite interesting that every one of these studies came up with students reading faster after a certain amount of time. All right, so the research questions. Is there a difference between the rate at which the students read their books and the rate at which they take their reading rate tests? And the answer is yes, and it's a big one. Is there a correlation between the speed at which they read their books and the speed at which they take their tests? That is, as they take their test faster, do they also read their book faster? Yes. I was worried about this. I thought that it would be a situation where the students take their test faster but don't read their book faster. But in fact, they take their test faster and read their book faster at almost exactly the same rate. So it's quite interesting. All right, so I had many more than 32 participants, but not all of them participated in the pre-test and the post-test. So I had to go with a certain number of students who completed all aspects of the study. That was 32 students. At a university in Korea in an English education department, and they were second to fourth year students. It was a 16-week semester, but we had to save time for final tests. So 15 out of the 16 weeks we did extensive reading. I'm going to skip this just a little bit. All I'm going to tell you is that I did a test on the texts and found that they came out to be, on the Gunning-Fogg and the Flesch-Kincaid reading level, that grade level. And then I did the same thing on the graded readers, and I selected the most difficult graded readers, and it turns out the most difficult graded readers got a lower score than the reading rate tests. The reading rate tests were higher in difficulty than the graded readers. And the students read easier graded readers than these. So I would expect, from a level of difficulty, for the students to read their books faster than their reading rate test, because the reading rate test is slightly more difficult than the books. But it was the opposite. In fact, they read their reading rate test much faster than they read their books. So I was using X-reading, and X-reading has been presented here. Maybe some of you guys have heard about X-reading so far. I was using X-reading, and they have access to over 300 graded readers. They can read on their phone, on their laptop, on their computer, any electronic device connected to the internet. Students in Korea all have smartphones. They all have access to Wi-Fi in the university campus, in the subway, and in the bus, and they always move around everywhere with this device attached to their face. And the font size doesn't seem to bother them. They're perfectly happy to read itsy-bitsy little text with their very sharp eyes. My eyes are not that sharp anymore. They used to be, but this gray hair, I've earned it. All right, so anyway, they had to read 50,000 words by midterm, and they had to read 100,000 words by the end of the semester. The average was 120,000 words over the participants. I give bonus for reading over 150,000 words. Some students read over 200,000 words because they wanted more bonus. I highly recommend giving a little bit of bonus, because you'll get students to double their reading words if you give them just a little bit of bonus. All right. I've already kind of explained this page, but for 15 weeks I gave them a pre-test and a post-test. I told them don't skim, and then they read the reading rate test, wrote down their time, flipped it over, answered the comprehension questions, and then waited until everybody was finished, and then did the second test and a third test. So we did 3 tests, because if you just do one test, they might not really hit their reading rate, so I averaged the 3 tests. For X-reading, it will automatically tell you the number of words that the students have read and the amount of time they've read, and figure out automatically the words per minute. So I selected a few books from the beginning of the semester, a few books from the end of the semester, and that was their beginning and end of semester reading rate. Okay? I didn't want to use their all semester reading rate, because they started out slow and then got faster. It wouldn't be their actual end and beginning reading rate. So this is what a sample class looks like. Some students will read, for example, 21 books at level 6.5. Now this isn't the Oxford 6.5. This is the X-reading level 6.5. 21 books at an average level of 6.5 for 183,000 words, and a reading rate of 145 words a minute over the course of the whole semester. So start out slower and then go faster. So the final reading rate is probably 160, and the initial reading rate is probably 120. But then the average reading rate is 145. Okay? And then you'll end up with some other students who read 5 books at level 12, or read 10 books at level 8. They all read around 100, 120, 150, 180,000. Here's an example student. These are the books that the students read. These are the levels of the books, the number of words in the books. Did they read 100% of the book? and how much time did it take them, and what is their words per minute. Okay? And I didn't require them to take the quiz. They have quizzes in there, like M-reader quizzes, that you can have the students take in order to get to the next book. So, I did paired samples t-test to determine the beginning and the end of their reading rate for the reading rate test and for the graded readers. And a couple of things to point out. The students who took the reading rate tests gained 47 words per minute over the course of the semester. And the effect size for this is a Cohen's d of 1.12. So for the Cohen's d determines your standard deviation. So it means it's 1.12 standard deviations above where they started on the pretest. And that is a measure of effect size, which is very important because it tells you how big the result is. Not that it's statistically significant, that's different. Statistical significance only tells you that it happened on purpose. But it doesn't tell you how big it happened. It could be that almost nothing happened on purpose. But this one says that a huge effect happened because a large effect is considered 0.5. And this is 1.12. For the books that they read on X reading, the books that they read on their phones or at home or in the subway, they gained 41 words per minute and their effect size was 0.82, which is larger than a large effect size, which would be 0.5. So both of these were highly effective ways of increasing students' reading rate. This is what it looks like in graphic form. The students began at 189 words per minute on their reading rate test. And they finished at 236 words per minute. Right here is 200. This line is the threshold that we were talking about, the theoretical threshold of clunky, bumpy reading versus nice, fluid, smooth, high comprehension reading. So if I were doing just the reading rate test, my analysis in my discussion would be the students moved from under to above this threshold. What a wonderful thing! But it turns out that the students who were reading their books at home or in the subway started reading at 140 words a minute and finished reading at 181 words a minute, not getting over that threshold. This is how fast their maximum reading speed is. This is how they actually read their graded readers. And this is the number that I think we should be concentrating on when we do our studies, not this number. Or at least both of these numbers. But this number, to me, we couldn't study this one until we had the students read online and we could get statistics for how long and how fast and when and how often they were reading. Now that we have this online reading program, this kind of stuff becomes a tool that we didn't have before. But now it's a tool that will give us more accurate measurements of different kinds of reading. Now, these two correlated very well. It turns out that this correlation, this is a moderate correlation. It's not a high correlation, it's a moderate correlation. But the correlation between the reading rate test at the beginning of the semester and the X reading at the beginning of the semester correlated to a median correlation. But by the end of the semester, it was also the same kind of correlation. And we can see that in this graph that I already showed you. They go up at about the same rate. So you could say, if you just do the reading rate test, that their actual at-home reading rate is about below their reading rate test. Or if you just do this one, you could say that their reading rate test speed, their maximum reading speed, is above their graded reader reading speed. And I think that studies should be looking at this and showing that there's a difference here and that this is what this reading rate is and this is what this reading rate is. And treat them as two statistics which need to be reported in studies. That's my recommendation. So suggestions for improvement. I need to find out how much the students were distracted. Because they're on their cell phone, and while they're reading their book in the subway, somebody sends them a text message. Yeah? So then they stop reading, answer the text message, and go back and read. Well, this program, if you have a period of inactivity for like a minute, if you don't flip the page within a minute, then it will log you off.
With the program, and the students, can they get text messages or WhatsApp messages coming through it, like on the screen while they're reading?
Yeah.
Yeah, the phone is binging and...
Right, it'll pop up.
So it can block in.
So here's the text, and it'll just pop up on the text. And then they can just go, oh, what did she say? Right. And then go back to the reading. Right. And so some students felt like they couldn't read in the subway because there were too many noisy distractions or people bumping into them, or they were getting too many text messages, and they just wanted to read on their computer at home. So some students just read on their computer at home, some students read uniquely in the subway, some students read in the library, some students read in different places and different times. One of the nice things about this program is you can carry the library with you in your pocket, and you can access it anytime you want. But the problem with it is that people can text you while you're reading. And I mean, that can happen with a regular book too. I mean, if you have a regular book, you can always get a text at the same time. Put the book down, answer the text, pick up the book. It's just that this will mess up the reading rate score.
So I wonder if the actual rate is somewhere in the two lines that you showed us. I wonder if the actual rate is really somewhere in between.
That's what I'm thinking. And so as I'm going to continue to do this research, I'm going to continue to find out more information about the distractions and things like that. And I'm sure that this is going to shrink a little bit. Right?
Okay, but like if you are taking 3 readings, or 3, readings from the beginning and the end,
Yes.
as a way of comparing, like averaging 3 here, averaging 3 there, why wouldn't those readings just happen in the classroom?
Sorry?
Like if they just did their first 3 readings
Yes, sure.
in class,
Right.
and then read wherever you want, and then do the last 3 readings in class, so you can observe whether they're being distracted.
Right.
It wouldn't really matter so much what happens in between.
Right.
Yes.
Because what happens in between is their real reading,
Yeah.
which is going to affect where they end up.
Right.
But you have a more accurate count from the beginning, and then if they read in class at the end,
Yeah.
that you just,
That's a good piece
I
of
mean,
advice.
why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have another
So
question.
have a 20-minute sustained silent reading period in
Absolutely.
class, and then just
Then you can
test
monitor it,
that for
right.
their reading rate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and just do that a couple of times in
Right.
class and call that their beginning of the semester reading rate. Very good point.
Yeah. And with your reading rate test, so I need to know a little bit more about this. When you call it a test, is your purpose, I use those activities a lot, and they're never a test. They are a mechanism for building reading fluency,
Right.
right? So they will do, I will do it for 20 minutes or whatever. They will do 4 stories in one class. And then, a week later, they'll do another 4 and another 4 through the semester.
Right.
And their goal is, if they get more than 70% correct, I let them know that they're not reading as fast as they should. Right? So they're keeping track of their reading, and then
Yeah.
I see what they read,
Yeah.
and they got lots of mistakes. You gotta slow down.
Yeah.
So their goal is to aim for the 200,
Yeah.
but only getting 70% of the questions
Why
right.
is it 70, not 80?
That's
Because I thought it was 80%. That's from Anderson. Like it's 80%
and
comprehension.
Anderson says 70.
Neil Anderson.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could put it at
He
different
just put a
rates.
quote up from
Yeah.
2014. He said
Yeah.
70.
Maybe it's
You can
changed.
put it at different rates, but yeah.
You always said
Well,
80.
but
That's
it's
like 15 years ago.
Yeah, but 15 years ago, they were also still using 95%, and
Yeah.
they didn't know it was as low. So now they say it's 98% of vocabulary to get to
So
70.
yeah, I was always
Because
90
70
and 80.
Yeah.
So it's
Because for a while it was 95, and now it's 98 and
98
70.
and 70.
98% comprehension of the vocabulary means 70% comprehension of the text. So 70% comprehension of the text would be an acceptable rate.
Which, again, just because of technology, they can be more accurate with that. So I guess I'm asking, what are you actually doing with your reading rate?
Mhm.
Do you just do it at the beginning and the end?
That's right. There's no reading rate training at all. And I specifically did that because I didn't want the reading rate training to get in the way of the extensive reading rate increase. So there's no reading rate exercise at all, except for on the first day of class, they take the 3 reading rate tests, and on the last day before finals, they take the reading rate test again. And I tell them
And
it
you're
doesn't,
doing
it
that-
doesn't matter in your grade, it doesn't matter if you're successful in this or not, it's just to find out what your
We
reading
should
rate
pre and
is.
post.
Yeah, it's just to find out what your reading rate is. And then I tell them, oh, you went up by 40 words a minute. That's a large increase. That's something that you should know, that reading these books did that for you. And then, you know, their eyes light up. They're like, hey, I did something. I accomplished something. And
But I would
then
think,
I tell them to keep reading over the summer, and they don't.
but I would think just by the very nature of the difference between reading 500-word texts with questions or reading a narrative that goes over a number of pages or an informational text, those two are so substantially different already that they would be measuring different things.
That is a good question.
I mean,
Yeah.
they,
When Biglar did his, he used narrative text as the 400-word reading passage.
they are usually narrative. I mean,
Mine weren't narrative, mine were expository.
well, actually, you're right. I use information and narrative, yeah.
Yeah,
Would you use the same, couldn't you use the same type of text for your reading rate? Is that what you're getting?
yeah, I'm thinking
Like,
that
is there a
type of
change
text.
in
No,
might
types?
have-
I'm
Yeah,
talking-
the same type of reading rate test, and then have the 3 of the same
Oh,
type.
no.
That's just-
I'm not saying that there's any problem with having continuity in your reading rate text. The difference between reading a short text and answering questions is completely different than reading an extensive reader. And so, by just definition, you would be measuring something different.
Yeah.
Right, and it turns out that people want to measure this by measuring this.
Well, yes.
Yeah, people want to know the graded reader rate
Correct.
in extensive reading programs, but the way that they go about finding the graded reader rate is by
do a
giving
test.
them a reading rate test.
Yeah.
And so far, the research didn't have this electronic tool which would measure a reading rate of the graded reader, and so there was no way to go about determining this number. We couldn't find it out. And so now we can, and so now this is a new kind of research that we can now do that we couldn't do before. So this is a brand new type of research.
To the degree that we know that they aren't constantly being distracted.
Right. And so one of my proposals is to have the students in a controlled environment, say, meet during a time that is not class time, and then have those students just sit and silently read and determine what is their silent reading rate when they're not distracted. And so, like you said, just do that at the beginning of the semester and the end of the semester. But I would rather do that over the course of a semester and see what is the curve,
Sure.
and do they increase in reading rate kind of this way or this way or this way? What is the curve of that increase in reading rate if you do that over the semester? But then you would be measuring something different, right? Because you would be measuring distracted reading rate
Yeah.
versus undistracted reading rate versus reading test rate, right? So I would call reading in the subway distracted reading rate, reading in an office undistracted reading rate, and then reading test would be reading test rate.
Are all the reading online? Like, I know X reading, right?
X-reading is
That's
all
online.
online. It's all
Are
online.
your reading rate tests online as well? Or are they paper-based?
No, I bring a paper, they sit there, everybody in the class, separate desks,
Okay.
read it, write down your time, flip it over, answer the questions,
Okay.
and then we go on to the next reading, do 3 readings, average the 3 readings together. So yeah, there we go.
Well, it is
Thank
interesting.
Yeah.
I just think that, you know, I like the fact, I think the students get immediate feedback when they see the words per minute, and I wonder if on X reading, by that desire to get to that threshold, whether they also might, like you say, might push themselves to
I
not be.
don't tell them about the threshold.
Right,
I
but
know,
they
but
see
they
their
don't.
words per minute.
Yes, sure.
Right, so I'm just saying, whether they knew it or not, they know they need more, because they know they can't read fast enough.
They see their words per minute on the reading rate rate test at the beginning and the end of the semester, but they don't really, it doesn't register with them, they're not researchers, they don't know what it means.
Yeah, but on X reading,
They don't see their reading rate. I, as a teacher, can see their reading rate.
Okay.
They can't.
they can't, okay,
Do you
that's,
have to hide it or it just doesn't come up?
It doesn't come up for them, it only comes up for us. Yeah. They don't know their reading rate, they just read.
I wonder too, I mean, one of the ways that we look at the difference now, because I do that intense, like reading rate, I don't call it tests, it's fluency building.
Sure.
So we do those to build fluency, and that's
Right.
one kind of reading. Then they do their extensive reading,
Yes.
and they keep track of how much time they spent, which again, of course, has distractions in it, and who knows what else.
Yeah.
So it seems to me, in either mode, X reader reading or personal reading and notation, there's a certain amount of, we just have to trust that it is what they're doing.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is why we really, in that case, can't put a lot of weight on it. Whereas when you do those in-class controlled settings,
Right.
you have something that at least you can demonstrate that there's been some control.
Yeah.
But the point is, it only measures the kind of reading. It doesn't tell us where they read on their own. But like according to Carver, it wouldn't anyway, because if they're reading to learn, way
Yeah.
down.
It depends on the level of text, and that's one of
And
the
what
things that I have to,
schema.
that's one of the things that I would like to work on. Here you can, here, you can see that this student began at level 11 on the X reading level and went 10, 9, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9, 9, 12. So this student kind of overshot the level of difficulty and then went down until enough confidence developed and then went back up in level of difficulty because of wanting to have a more challenging text. That kind of thing.
But all of that was counting into the student's reading rate, so we have no idea about,
How level
comprehension.
affects reading rate, that's right, that's exactly right. And some students, as you can see, read an average level of 6.5, whereas other students read an average level of 12. Right? So yes, some students are stronger at reading, some students are weaker at reading. When you get a large enough sample size, then that stuff washes out.
that's not, it's how much everybody develops.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter
But
where
with
they
the
start.
X reading, they
And-
didn't do any little quizzes afterwards, they just read.
Yeah, that's right.
There's no way of knowing if they were just looking at, like, our students, they can just look at the words and flip pages, you know, you've got
Yeah,
to make
but
sure they actually read.
If you flip pages, you're probably going to flip them too fast, and it'll come up that you're reading 600 words a minute, and I'll be like, what was up with this?
Right.
Yeah, in class, they're like,
So, there are some,
Well, I mean, that's why all the reading you do isn't ER.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
ER can be one part of it, right?
Right.
Because we have a lot of other things where they have
Right.
to demonstrate that they've gotten
Yeah.
something out of it.
but one of the things that we did, I mean, there are no quizzes here, right? But they had to come for midterm interviews and final interviews with me, and there they had to demonstrate comprehension of the text. Also in class we did, you're familiar with extensive reading activities for language, for teaching
Yeah.
language? The book by Bamford and Day with
Yeah.
lots of, we used a variety of different activities, from Sentence Detective to Neighbors, really a variety of activities. Every week in class we would talk about our books. So if they weren't reading,
you'd find out.
I'd find it. Yeah, so they were
Yeah,
reading.
even, and honestly, in my classes, where it's completely on their honor, honestly, like, but they have to put what they're reading into Google Docs, which I can see, and it's like, wow, you read, 50,000 words between yesterday and today.
Interesting.
You know, I don't think he did. And that in the almost 8 years that I've been doing ER, there have been in hundreds of students,
Mhm.
probably not even a handful, who have obviously cheated.
Right.
So they may be fudging here and there, but obvious cheaters,
No, our guys here do.
Yeah.
Well, it's all about mitigating to prevent,
Yeah.
helping.
yeah, oh yeah.
So yeah,
Interesting though, I mean,
Yeah.
I like
Thank you.
to have,
Thank you.